Two distinct coalitions, formed by powerful lions, were about to face each other in a war that would forever change the history of Kruger National Park. On one side were the Joes, a coalition originally formed by 5 fearless male lions, united by a single goal: conquest. On the other side were the Cubs, for equally powerful kings, experienced and with unquestionable strength, determined to protect their territory and their offspring. The balance of the wildlands was disrupted the moment the Joes' coalition conquered 3 prides, dethroning their kings and consolidating their reputation as a dominant force. To achieve such a feat, the 5 Joes trained their battle skills relentlessly against nomadic lions. The strategy was simple yet brutal, for lions surrounded the solitary opponent, preventing any chance of escape, while one of them challenged the rival to a mortal battle. The others observed, learning from every move, every strike. Thus, the Joes' coalition grew stronger with every confrontation, dominating not just with physical strength but through their remarkable unity as 5 brothers. With 3 prides under their control, the Joes further strengthened their power, uniting lionesses to fortify their position. They never separated for long, except during nightly patrols across their lands. However, there was still one target the Joes wished to conquer: a pride ruled by 4 powerful kings, known as the Cubs, who protected skilled hunting lionesses and a new generation of cubs. The youngest brother of the Joes became fascinated with one of the Cubs' queens. Driven by an uncontrollable obsession, he risked everything in an attempt to reach her. Acting recklessly, he escaped alone, without the support of his brothers, to try to conquer the Cubs' queen. His attack was quickly repelled, and the Cubs, without hesitation, killed the young Joe. His body was left by the riverbank as a clear message to his brothers. When the Joes found their fallen brother's body, the silence gave way to roars of rage and grief that echoed across the savannah. Mourning mixed with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. The coalition that had once acted with calm and strategy now found themselves consumed by fury. The careful and planned offensives that had led them to so many victories were set aside. Now, the Joes' hearts screamed for revenge. Consumed by pain and fury, the Joes abandoned any remnants of planning and marched with relentless determination toward the Cubs' territory. Their roars reverberated through the savannah as a clear warning. Vengeance was coming. The coalition advanced with force and brutality, their steps resolute, their claws ready to tear through the pride of their rivals. The Cubs, however, were not caught off guard. With years of accumulated experience, the 4 kings anticipated the attack. They knew the Joes were acting emotionally and would therefore be more predictable. When the 2 groups finally clashed, the tension in the air was palpable, as though the savannah itself held its breath. The battle that followed was one of the most violent ever witnessed. For almost 3 hours, the sounds of roars, blows, and bites mingled with the wind sweeping across the African plains. The Joes, driven by their desire for revenge, attacked with uncontrolled fury, while the Cubs, more experienced and strategic, defended with precision and firmness. Every strike was heavy, every movement carried the weight of pain and hatred. The lions engaged in a physical and mental confrontation, testing the limits of their strength and endurance. However, the Joes' confidence in their sheer brutality was not enough to defeat the Cubs. Injured and exhausted, the 5 kings of the coalition were forced to retreat. As they withdrew, the open wounds on their bodies burned, but the pain of their wounded pride was even greater. The Joes realized they were facing worthy adversaries, lions just as strong as they were, but with something even more dangerous: years of experience in battle. Back in their territory, the Joes retreated to lick their wounds and reflect. The defeat had not extinguished their desire for revenge. It had only proven that uncontrolled fury would not be enough. They would need time to recover and, most importantly, to plan each move carefully. But the Cubs, sensing the Joes' emotional imbalance, decided not to give their adversaries time to regroup. Just 3 days later, they invaded the Joes' territory with a single goal: to strike where it hurt most. The morning was hot, the sun shining brightly, and the Joes, still recovering from deep wounds, rested under the shade of the trees. The quiet calm of the savannah was interrupted by the stealthy movement of the Cubs. who approached with the deadly precision of experienced predators. That was when the cubs found them. Two of the Joe's cubs, innocently exploring the terrain around the pride, too far away for anyone to protect them. In a swift and cruel move, the cubs attacked, breaking the spines of the young ones and killing them without hesitation. The lionesses, hearing the sounds of the struggle, ran in desperation, only to find the lifeless bodies of their cubs. Grief and disorientation overtook the pride. The lionesses ran to their kings, roaring for comfort. The Joes, still injured, rose immediately, their bodies tired and aching, but their minds ignited by the loss. They marched to the place where the cubs had been killed. The scent of the cubs was everywhere, embedded in the vegetation and damp ground. Once again, fury consumed them, and even in their weakened state, the Joes advanced toward the cubs' territory, determined to retaliate. However, the result was the same. This time, the battle did not last as long. With their bodies still weakened from the previous fight, the Joes found themselves at a disadvantage. Heavy blows struck them as exhaustion limited their movements. When they realized they were close to collapse, the Joes retreated once more. Gravely wounded and with their pride shattered, the Joes coalition faced a cruel dilemma. The cubs' message was clear. Either the Joes abandoned their pursuit of vengeance or they would lose their lives. The weight of the defeat was not just physical. The Joes now bore the latent mourning of a fallen brother and two slain cubs. To them, defeat was not only a failure as kings but as protectors of their lionesses and offspring. Even so, they knew they could not give up. Not while their rivals continued to provoke and attack their families. The war had only just begun, and the African savannah still had much blood to absorb. The Joes were weakened, their wounds still open, and their minds heavy with grief. The roars that echoed through the night were not mere manifestations of pain but silent promises of revenge. The coalition could no longer act on impulse, or they would lose everything they had conquered. While the Joes struggled to recover, the cubs wasted no time. They knew they needed to keep their adversaries under pressure, exploiting every emotional and physical weakness. Thus, in a demonstration of cold calculation and strategy, the cubs orchestrated a new attack. Days later, in the silence of dawn, the cubs once again invaded the Joes' territory. The wind blew lightly across the savannah, carrying the scent of the intruders with it, but the Joes, still debilitated, failed to notice the approach. Hidden by the darkness and moving like shadows, the cubs found a perfect opportunity. That was when they spotted a cub who had strayed from the pride. Small and defenseless, the young one had wandered off while playing among the bushes. The cubs did not hesitate. In a swift and lethal attack, the cub was killed. Its small spine was broken with cruel precision, and another life was taken from the Joes. That morning, the lionesses found the lifeless body of the cub. The grief was unbearable. They roared desperately, their voices filled with sorrow, as they carried the small body back to the pride. The scent of the cubs was everywhere, a reminder that the enemy was close, watching, and waiting. This time, the Joes did not move. Despite the growing pain and the anger pulsing through their hearts, they knew that attacking, still weakened, would mean complete ruin. They roared loudly, mourning the small fallen female cub. Their roars were filled with hatred and frustration, a warning to the savannah that, although they would not act now, revenge was being prepared. The cubs, realizing that their provocation had not been enough to drag the Joes back into battle, continued to watch. They were not satisfied. They wanted a definitive victory and knew that every attack wore their adversaries down a little more. That was when they decided to act bolder. For days, the cubs observed the movements of the rival pride. They waited patiently until they found the opening they needed. The opportunity came on a hot afternoon, when one of the Joes' queens was returning from a hunt, accompanied by other lionesses. The attack was quick and fatal. As the lionesses approached their pride, the cubs emerged from the shadows, isolating one of the females. Surprised and with no chance to escape, the lioness was killed right there. Her roars of pain echoed through the savannah before falling silent, leaving only a disturbing stillness in the air. When the Joes found the fallen queen's body, There was no explosion of rage as before. They were different now. They roared silently with cold and calculating eyes. The coalition had learned a valuable lesson. Impulsiveness had cost them too much. They had lost a brother, cubs, and now a queen. The pain still burned within them, but the decision had been made. There would be no more mistakes. Physical and emotional wounds accompanied them, but this time, the Joes chose silence. They remained close to their pride, gathering strength and waiting for the right moment to act. For the first time since the conflict began, the cubs did not get the immediate reaction they expected. The savannah seemed to wait, silent, for the next move. A restless calm settled over the wildlands, while the Joes, hidden in the heart of their territory, crafted a new plan. The war was not yet over, and they would not rest until the cubs were defeated. The Joes learned from their defeats. Every loss, every drop of blood spilled on the savannah served as a reminder that emotion could no longer control their actions. They were kings, and to defeat the cubs, they would have to act as strategists, not as predators driven by impulse. For the first time since the conflict began, the Joes changed tactics. Instead of passively waiting for the cubs' attacks or launching poorly planned ambushes, the coalition reorganized itself. They began to move more actively during the day, a time unusual for their movements. When the cubs attempted to invade their territory, they were surprised to find the Joes already in defensive positions, ready to face any incursion. This change confused the cubs. Until then, the more experienced coalition believed the Joes were too worn down to react. Now, every time the invaders approached, searching for vulnerable targets, they found the 4 Joes standing firm, roaring with intimidation and commanding respect. It was a silent but clear message. The territory was protected, and the Joes would give up no more lives. For days, the cubs avoided direct confrontations. Their attacks decreased, and the savannah returned to an uneasy silence. However, the Joes did not believe the cubs had given up. They knew their adversaries were only waiting for a new opportunity to strike. It was during this time that the Joes decided to reverse the roles. If the cubs were silent, the Joes would be the ones to take the war to them. With their wounds healed and their focus regained, the 4 lions began a series of incursions into rival territory. During the second invasion, fortune finally smiled on the Joes. They found one of the cubs alone, accompanied only by a lioness. The young rival king stood no chance. In a quick and lethal assault, the Joes surrounded him, isolating him from the lioness who desperately tried to defend him. The fight was short. The cub was killed, his body left there as a mark of the revenge the Joes had long awaited. The lioness, however, was spared, not out of mercy, but because the Joes knew that, sooner or later, she would join them. It was the law of the savannah. The winners inherited everything. The Joes did not immediately return to their lands. They hid in the vegetation, waiting for the remaining cubs to discover the body of their fallen brother. The scent of death soon drew the rivals in. When the 3 surviving cubs gathered around the body, something changed. For the first time, the experienced kings looked vulnerable. It was the moment the Joes had been waiting for. Without giving the cubs time to react, the Joes emerged from the bushes with the force of a thunderstorm. They attacked with brutality and precision, unleashing weeks of frustration, pain, and mourning into calculated strikes. Roars of rage and fury dominated the savannah as the cubs struggled to resist the relentless assault. The Joes' strikes were measured and violent, as if every bite and every blow carried the weight of all the lives lost until that moment. The strength of the coalition, now united and focused, was irresistible. The cubs, despite their experience, could not withstand the brutal strength of the Joes. The final clash was short and decisive. When the dust settled and silence once again dominated the savannah, victory belonged to the Joes. The cubs were defeated. The coalition that once ruled with power and experience had now fallen under the weight of a carefully planned vengeance. With the war over, the Joes consolidated their dominance over the rival territory. The lionesses and cubs that once belonged to the cubs were now theirs. They had not just won the war. They had proven to themselves and to the entire African savannah why they were the supreme kings. After their ultimate victory over the cubs, the savannah fell into a respectful silence. The coalition of the Joes had triumphed. The blood of their adversaries had been spilled, and the territory that once belonged to the four kings was now under the rule of the new conquerors. Their victory was not only physical but symbolic. The Joes had overcome their own limitations and demonstrated that, in the African savannah, the strongest is not merely the one who strikes but the one who learns, adapts, and endures. With the territory conquered, the Joes solidified themselves as a dominant force. The lionesses that once served the cubs were integrated into the new reign, and the remaining cubs were now protected under the watchful eyes of the four kings. The lands were vast, rich in prey and resources, and the Joes ruled now with the authority that only victors of bloody wars could command. What set the Joes apart from their adversaries was not just their brute strength but their resilience. Even in the face of devastating losses, a fallen brother, murdered cubs, and a lost queen, they found a way to reorganize, adapt their strategies, and turn the tide of the war. Each lost battle had been a lesson, and each wound a reminder of what was at stake: the legacy of their coalition. As the years passed, the Joes' reputation grew. They were now masters of combat and strategy, living legends among the lions of the savannah. The story of their war against the cubs became a milestone, a tale carried by the wind that swept through the plains of Kruger National Park. The last record of the Joes came in July 2023, when a team of researchers tracked the kings, now nearly 14 years old. Still strong, the Joes continued to reign, protecting their lionesses and enjoying everything the savannah had to offer. Even with the passage of time, their relentless spirit remained intact. The Kruger War proved once again that in the African savannah, only the strongest and most resilient survive. Through their victories and losses, the Joes wrote a new chapter among the lions, sealing their name as the true kings of the jungle. With the war's end, the Joes' coalition not only dominated the cubs' territory but also earned the respect of the entire savannah. Their victories were brutal, their losses suffered, but every step strengthened them. Now, as supreme kings, the Joes ruled with authority and control. The lionesses that once belonged to the cubs became part of the new domain, and the cubs born after the war carried the blood of the victors. The genetics of the Joes, refined through experience, strength, and the unity of their coalition, began to spread across the wildlands of Kruger National Park. Each surviving cub was a promise of continuity, a new generation that would inherit the determination and spirit of their fathers. The Joes did not grow complacent after their victory. Their strategy was clear. They patrolled their territory with discipline, ensuring that no nomadic lion dared to invade their lands. Their presence was imposing. The mere sound of their roars during the night was enough to drive away any threat. They knew that power could not simply be conquered. It had to be maintained. As the years went by, the Joes continued to rule. However, the savannah is relentless, and the cycle of life never stops. New coalitions began to emerge in nearby regions. Younger, stronger lions started to test the boundaries of the Joes' territory. The reign that had been unquestionable for so long now faced small but growing threats. Time, a predator that no lion can defeat, began to leave its mark on the Joes. Wrinkles appeared around their eyes. Their paws no longer held the same vigor, and fatigue weighed on the bodies that had once devastated their enemies. Yet the kings continued to fight. Each battle was harder, but the determination that had made them triumph never abandoned them. In July 2023, researchers finally found the last records of the Joes. The coalition, now nearly 14 years old, was living its final days still as kings. Even in their old age, they had not been defeated. They remained firm, reproducing and protecting their lands until the very last moment. Their bodies bore scars from a lifetime of battles, each mark a story, each wound a reminder. The savannah, which had witnessed their victories and losses, now held their memories as part of its eternal cycle. The story of the Joes did not end with their deaths. Their lineage, spread through lionesses and cubs, continued to flourish across the wildlands. New coalitions, born from their blood, carried the same strength, resilience, and strategic prowess that had once made them legends. The wind of the savannah still carries their stories, The roars of new kings echo across the plains, but the elders know. The war of the Joes and Cubs will never be forgotten. It is told in every lion's scar, in every predator's watchful gaze, and in every silent step beneath the scorching African sun. And so, the cycle continues. Kings fall, kings rise, but the wild never forgets those who proved why the lion is called the true king. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's simple, quick, and helps us keep bringing you amazing content.